I'll take this opportunity to open our meeting and introduce our panel, our presenter, Jason Stanford. And Jason is the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance. And he oversees the day-to-day operations of the Alliance, which include long-term planning, transportation policy, analysis, advocacy, and community outreach. And before leading the Alliance, Jason spent 6 years and 7 legislative sessions as the Chief of Staff to a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. And during that time, he worked on numerous public policy issues, including multimodal transportation, small business economic development, sustainable energy infrastructure, and housing affordability. Right now, Jason is focused on applying that experience to unite regional stakeholders in Northern Virginia and throughout the region and prioritize key transportation projects that will keep our region moving forward for decades to come. Today, Jason has been with us in previous economic development meetings, and Jason today will discuss COVID-19 transportation trends, the key regional projects that are coming up and are needed, and the future of transportation in Northern Virginia. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Jason. And if you have a question, can you please put it in chat, and Scott will moderate a discussion, question and answer period after Jason's presentation. So thank you, Jason, and welcome to all of you who have joined us, and let us begin. And I will mute myself, and Jason, it's all yours.
Thank you, Anita, for that introduction, and thank you, Scott, Anita and Scott, for the opportunity to speak today to the Committee for Dulles' Transportation and Economic Development Committee. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking in your heads, what transportation issues could possibly be going on right now during the middle of a pandemic. But I'm here to tell you that there's actually a lot that's happening in our region that I think folks really need to be aware of all across Northern Virginia, but also Maryland, DC, and the whole Washington region. And so I want to be able to I'm going to cover some of those big transportation issues that I think are, really important to us and to, folks in our community. Whenever I talk about what's happening in transportation, I think it's always good to start things off looking at a regional perspective. And I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but I feel like it really frames the importance of this conversation. And that's the fact that if you look at what the Transportation Planning Board has shown for our region in the next 25 years to 2045, you'll see that about 80% of the trips in our region are going to be taken via automobile. About half of those are single occupancy trips. Half of them are HOV trips, in other words, more than one person in the vehicle. About 15% of the trips are walk and bike, and 7% are transit. If you look at where those trips are taking place, it's obvious that in the region's core, you have more transit, walking, biking trips, and fewer automobile trips. You go to the inner suburbs, it matches what we see as a region, and that's actually where most of the trips in our region are taking place. And then you go to the outer suburbs, and you see about 90% automobile usage, 1% transit, and 8% walk and bike. And this is based on all of the improvements that we have coming to our region, a number of them multimodal. This is still what we're likely to, to see in about 25 years. In addition, if you look at how we're about to spend our funding for the next 25 years in terms of transportation on both capital improvement, state of good repair, and operations. About 2/3 of our funding is going to go towards our transit system, and about 1/3 is going to go towards our highway or roadway system. So for the Alliance, those of you that don't know, and I know we've worked partnership with the Committee for Dulles for a long time, but we've been the visionary leaders for regional transportation solutions in Northern Virginia for more than 30 years, focused on creating a better quality of life and economic prosperity for our region. We have a proven record of success, focused on making sure we have sustainable transportation funding, improved transit options, and increased Potomac River crossing capacity. Backed by regional thought leaders, we are your voice for a 21st century transportation network in Northern Virginia. Our vision for a 21st century transportation network includes ensuring that we have adequate funding, that we are prioritizing regionally significant projects. Those are the projects that do the most to relieve traffic congestion, reduce travel time delays, and if you're spending less time getting from point A to point B, then you have more time to do what you want with your life, whether that's creating a small business or jobs and hiring people, or having a better quality of life. And so those are the things that really get us to continued growth and development and a better quality for our region. So I wanted to give a quick, last year I was invited to speak to this group, and I wanted to give kind of a very quick 2020 recap on some of the priorities that we worked together with the Committee for Dulles on. One was the funding restoration for the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. In 2018, more than $100 million a year was diverted from the authority to go towards Metro. We have restored about a little over $50 million of that. A big chunk of that came last year, including $20 million a year in dedicated state funding. And then last year, NVTA updated their 6-year plan, and about $314 million went towards Alliance-backed projects. Thank you to the Committee for Dulles for supporting that effort. The Committee for Dulles also was extremely helpful in supporting us on the Route 28 bypass issue, which we've been continuing to push. This is really about expanding north-south capacity on Route 28 around Manassas and really increasing access to Dulles from the Prince William and from the south parts of our region. And that is moving forward in Prince William County. They're going to design and hopefully will move forward to construction in the next couple of years. In terms of a regional express lanes network, this is one of the Transportation Planning Board's top regional priorities. And Virginia's done a great job of expanding our network, but we have one segment left to get up to the American Legion Bridge, and then Maryland is currently working on expanding their project as well. We run some campaigns that, again, supported from the regional business community, including the Committee for Dulles, to generate supportive comments for that project, as well as 495 Next. This is really a multimodal project because it's going to be hot lanes that both incentivize carpooling, create reliable trips for transit. And right now, Virginia is doing a study in Maryland, a joint study to look at expanding express bus service across the American Legion Bridge using the express lanes. And then the last piece I just wanted to touch on was the recent special session. There was about $1 billion shortfall in transportation funding over the next few years. We worked with the regional business community to both safeguard Northern Virginia Transportation Authority funding, but also give flexibility and to VDOT, assuming that they would prioritize current projects and programs, which they're doing, but using some of their funding flexibility for projects that don't need it right this moment, to use that funding to keep other things afloat. And a big part of that for us was, for Northern Virginia, an additional $10 million a year in our operating and capital subsidies for WMATA. And those budget amendments were approved and supported by all the organizations that you see here, including the Committee for Dulles. So, that sort of gives us kind of a quick, overview of what happened last year. But looking forward into this year, we have a number of priorities that we're working on. We put together our business community, priority statement, on a number of big key issues, including opening and integrating Silver Line Phase 2, transportation priority projects, north-south connectivity, including Route 28 bypass, and a number of other major transportation improvements for our region, which the Committee for Dulles has signed on to as well. In terms of this year's General Assembly, there were no bills that would change up the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority and how it funds and prioritizes transportation. But there were conversations and people considering putting those bills in. And because of the shortness of the session this year, having 30 days instead of the traditional 45, and a 7-bill limit as opposed to a 15-bill limit, which they would normally have, then none of those bills were filed. As a result, there actually aren't a lot of transportation bills being filed in general, but there was a $30 million budget amendment in FY22, and that would help Northern Virginia localities with their operating and capital subsidy payments for WMATA. That budget amendment has not, they haven't approved any of the budget amendments. They haven't released their budget yet. So we're still waiting to see what happens with that, but that would be a huge help to localities in Northern Virginia and keep them from having to shift funding from other transportation projects and priorities to just sort of keeping WMATA afloat. The other, I would say for us, a real focus at the state level this year is going to be focused on smart scale. And that is how we fund transportation construction projects at the state level. A lot of people don't realize, but VDOT and the state are responsible for all of the primary and secondary roads in Virginia, with the exception of certain cities and localities that have some of that responsibility. So in this most recent round of Smart Scale, this is the list of staff recommended projects and how they scored. You don't have to read through all of these. I would point out in the first column, when you look at where it says district, there's one glaring hole that I see, and that's the fact that there's 0 Fairfax County projects or Loudoun County projects, for that matter, that are receiving Smart Scale funding in this round. This is, projects that go into the 6-year program update. You can see here the vast majority of them are in Alexandria, Falls Church, Fairfax City, Arlington County. You might ask yourself, what's happening? Why is Fairfax County projects not getting funded? That Route 1 Glebe project that you just saw up there at the top, this is how Smart Scale scores that project. You can see here it has a 0 congestion mitigation benefit, a 0 safety benefit, 0 accessibility benefit, 0.4 economic development, a negative environmental score, but it has 20 benefit points from land use. And you can see that here on the kind of weighted factor thing. So that's ends up creating a 0 to 100 scale. So this project has has a benefit of 19.6 divided by the cost, which produces the Smart Scale score. It's the highest scoring project in all of Virginia. So why is that project being funded so highly or being scored so highly from land use? This is where our concerns come in, because the way that the land use score is being calculated for Smart Scale now, it's really focused on a project's location rather than its impact. It takes the job and population density and multiplies it by its walkability to non-work destinations. If you're thinking, what the heck is that? Like most people are, here's a map that VDOT has put together of non-work access scores. So whatever your job and population density is, it gets multiplied by this multiplier. So, look at where the dark red areas are. Those are the areas that get a huge multiplier in land use for their score in addition to their current density, versus other areas that don't. Just to go back to that, we also have an issue with the cost benefit analysis, which is the fact that Smart Scale distills these 5 or 6 different benefit categories into, the 0 to 100 number, and then divides it by cost. So a $1 million project or request has to have 100 times the benefit score of a $1 million project. As a result, projects with small benefits and small costs are outcompeting projects with big benefits and big costs. And the land use factor is really exacerbating that. looking at this project here, this is the Soapstone project that Fairfax County submitted. You can see they requested $110 million. This is 3 lanes over the Dulles Toll Road in Reston, including bike lanes, as well as pedestrian facilities on both sides of the bridge. You can see here 350 people moved during the peak period, person throughput, 57 hours of delay during the peak period, but it gets a 6 on congestion mitigation. So as far as smart scale is concerned, once you start putting it in all the weighted factors and comparing it to other projects and things like that, this project produces 6 times the congestion mitigation of a project with the top scoring project, which is 0. At the same time, if you look over at the land use category all the way on the right, it has half the land use score. This is a project that has bike and pedestrian facilities a block from a metro station, but because it's not as dense and because it doesn't have as much of a non-work access score, it's not getting that same benefit. So you have the first project with a benefit score of 19, the second project with a benefit score of 21, and because it's $110 million, it has a much, much lower smart scale score. So I think the way that these factors are happening, we're unlikely to see major transportation improvements for Northern Virginia come forward unless we see some changes here. Especially in areas that are in Fairfax County, Prince William, and Loudoun. And that's going to be something that we are going to be working with folks to try to, push for more changes. We did get some changes 2 years ago to help improve it, but it's clear that more needs to be done. Getting back to the regional express lanes, which I know we spoke about a little bit earlier, but we are continuing to push forward with that priority, including, as I mentioned before, alternative 9 is kind of selected as the recommended preferred alternative. They're going to announce a P3 partner for that in February. The Board of Public Works is actually going to vote on that pre-agreement in April, and so we're continuing to push on that issue. And then I said 495 next, that small blue part there in Virginia that you see, Fairfax County is waiting for a response on VDOT, but we're hoping to secure their endorsement of the project sometime in March. And then the last 2 issues I just wanted to touch on real quick are WMATA and some of the COVID transportation trends that we're seeing. Very quickly, a lot of you are familiar with what's happening at WMATA right now, but fare revenue is down, 90%. They did get initial federal funding to sort of make up some of this. And they also just recently got about $600 million in federal funding towards the end of last year. If you look at the ridership numbers, these are the riderships that we're seeing on the left is bus line riderships, and you can see being down anywhere between 40, 50, 60, 70%, depending on the line. The bottom 3 squares on the left-hand side of your screen on the other side of the Blue River, those are Virginia. The gray are bus lines that have essentially been put on hold until more funding is available. And then on the right side, you can see the, rail ridership. So what a lot of people point out is, bus ridership is still, isn't as impacted, but it's still down pretty significantly compared to what it was before. And frankly, bus ridership was on the decline before the pandemic. At the same time, rail ridership is still down dramatically. And this is comparing September of 2019 to September of 2020. Why is that a problem? Because even though Metrobus accounts for about of the ridership of the metro system, it's only about 17% of the fare box revenue. And we just started in January collecting metro bus fares again. For most of the pandemic, people have been boarding on the back of the bus. They've not been paying their fares. There was no requirement for them to. So we just started getting back into that. You can see here Metro Rail accounts for 80% of the revenue. And 64% of that revenue comes from the peak period. So, think about this. If there's an increase in telework as a result of the pandemic, how is Metro Rail and commuter rail going to be affected? Well, much of their revenue source from ridership is dependent upon high peak period rail travel. So even if we had the same ridership numbers we had before the pandemic, but they were off peak or during the weekends, we would still see, revenue shortfalls. This just touches on what happened in FY21. We're actually in the last half of that now. So that ends at the end of June of this year and then starts FY22. But you can see here that COVID-19 decreased the revenue anticipation. The CARES Act funding helped, account for most of that. But on the right, you'll see about $135 million of the CARES Act funding was actually used to decrease the local subsidies. And I think for Virginia, that benefit was around $35 million of our, operating subsidy for WMATA was reduced because of the federal dollars. Because of the new money that was given, $600 million, $100 million of that is going into FY21. And their budget was able to keep at the current levels that it is now. So they didn't end up putting in the dramatic service cuts, but you probably heard they're going to do those in January of 22. You can see here, the FY21 budget is with the current service levels. There are going to be increases to that budget that are just natural every year, that happen every year. So that budget is going to increase. If you look at the revenue that they're expecting from ridership, which is down, again, very dramatically, and then keeping the FY 2022 subsidy at the same, with a few exceptions, increasing it, it's still about $100 million less than what they were expecting localities to pay for FY21 before the pandemic. But there's still that $700 million gap. They're using about $515 million in federal money to cover that. So the remaining gap is about $200 million. There's a lot of ways that they could look at that. I think there has been some movement at the federal level to, put forward more money for transit, which would likely help, cover that gap. But I do think it's important for us to kind of look longer term. And here's what kind of the GM's new proposal. On the left, you see this is what they were proposing before receiving the most recent round of federal money. Now you can see basically they put off the cuts for 6 more months. And the result of that being, they save some money, but as a result, they're not necessarily stretching out the full amount of the federal money that they could be. And if they were paying essentially what they would be in FY21, that would essentially have another $100 million, but instead they're relying on federal money to basically keep the subsidies lower for the jurisdictions, which I understand from a fiscal standpoint, but is sort of partially creating that funding gap that we're seeing here. Service comparisons, so that folks are aware, at the top row, that's what we have right now. Opening at 5, closing at 11. On current, we're running about 80% of rail at normal capacity and bus at about 80 to 85%. Keep in mind that's with rail ridership down about 80% and bus ridership down about 50 to 60%. In January, we will then shift to rail service being at about 30% and bus service being at about 50% without additional funding. So some of our key takeaways from the Alliance is a focus on, additional money or service cuts are essential to the long-term sustainability of Metro. Metro really, I think, should undertake an evaluation of service goals and revenue expectations for the future to meet a new normal. How can they balance a change in service demand with both equity, making sure that they have the lines that they need for folks who will depend on transit service, but also developing a long-term revenue model that's less dependent on peak rail ridership going forward. And whether that's additional revenue or additional subsidy, is yet to be seen where that comes from. But I think that we need to be having that conversation now as a region instead of just assuming that the federal government is going to swoop in, every 6 months with another chunk of cash to sort of keep us running at 80% when our ridership is down so dramatically. In terms of next steps, the WMATA budget public comment hearings are going to be in March. We will be involved in that as well. And then the last couple slides, and I apologize, Scott, for going on so long here, but I did just have a few on the COVID-19 impact on traffic. The key for this slide, and this is volume trends for the entire state during peak periods, we see a decrease on average of about 10 to 20% volume, and the same is true for essentially non-interstate. You see a lot more in the peak period traffic volumes. The AM period is where things are lower. In terms of Northern Virginia, I-66 inside the Beltway, you see a pretty big, volume drop. But I-95, the 495, the Capitol Beltway on the Virginia side between I-95 and Braddock Road, traffic volumes are getting pretty close back to what they were historically. And you can see here on the delays, in the PM hour, delays are starting to return as well. Not as bad as they were before, but they are returning. And I would add to people, this is what's happening without, with most schools closed, with people not returning to work yet, with, recreational activities closed. There's a lot of travel in our region that has not returned. But even still, we still see, major volume and delays starting to return. So as our region continues to open up, it's very reasonable to expect that that would continue, even with increased telework. And I said, frankly, as our region continues to grow, there's a possibility the pandemic might have bought us a little bit of time. But the reality is we were way behind where we needed to be in terms of transportation infrastructure investments anyway. And so as our region grows, we're going to need more transportation infrastructure and capacity to move more people through our region. And if we don't do that, we could see people continue to flee or go to other parts, other places. So with all of that, I'm happy to take any questions, Scott, from the Committee for Dulles, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here again. And would love to hear from folks about, the presentation or any other transportation issues that they're focused on.
All right, Jason, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate it. It was a lot of good information for us. I would ask if you could share your slide deck with us and send it to me via email, and we will post it. And for those on the call with us, I know some of you joined us a little late. We are recording this, and we'll post the recording up and have that available so you can see the whole presentation. Just quickly, Jason, a couple of questions that I have. Where are we at with North Star from Loudon going into Prince William? This is a connection that is important. Not only to the airport, but for economic development, period.
Absolutely. And, what we're seeing is, as many of you know, a few years ago, Prince William County removed any kind of improvements north of I-66 to the Loudoun County line. And in contrast, and this is a designated state corridor of statewide significance. Loudoun County is moving ahead with North Star Boulevard improvements. They're extending it south of Route 50 down to Tall Cedars. They have in their comprehensive plan to widen it as a boulevard to 4 lanes and then eventually to 6. And then you hit the Prince William Loudoun County line and you have a 1-lane bridge over a stream, and then 2 lanes on Saunders Road. So you go down to another road, then you have to take a left and a right and then go down further, and basically 2-lane, farm roads. And so, we are, essentially seeing all of that play out, where you have a lot of truck traffic. Just a few weeks ago, we heard of a horrible story of a high school student driving down Saunders who lost his life as a result of traffic there. And so, it's really imperative for us from a safety perspective and from a regional connectivity perspective to have Prince William County back in the plan to make a better connection between I-66 and Loudoun County. There is no direct connection. There should be some, and our focus is strategic improvements to existing roadways to basically handle the travel demand that's already there today, to improve safety and also help improve some of the economic competitiveness of Prince William County in our region. So right now we're focused on working with partners to get that back into the comp plan for Prince William.
All right. Anita sent a question through chat. It says, Jason, have you heard or surveyed employers about their inclinations on telework versus in office?
Sure. We've heard a lot of different things, right, since the pandemic began. I know a lot of people, it's very popular. People are doing surveys of their members to kind of see what folks are doing. You know, I guess maybe my thought is that while I guess it's better than not having any information, you know, a survey monkey survey versus a scientific survey, one that surveys, you know, CEOs versus actually surveying real people and what their, you know, travel demands might be. I think that would be more effective. You know, I have heard about efforts that hopefully will be released soon, where there might actually be a survey of real people besides just, you know, what top level folks who, frankly, a lot of us in our companies were teleworking long before the pandemic started. You know, so I think, you know, I have heard of some of those, but I think what really I look to is what the demand's going to be from people. And frankly, you know, I think a lot of people are tired of being isolated at their homes. I think the same way we talked about people wanting to travel again, go out in their communities, you're going to see a lot of that. And then the other part that I think is really important to remember is that commute trips count for only about 20% of the total trips in our region. So if you look at, you know, the slides I showed you at the very beginning, those are total trips. Only 20% of those are commute trips. So even if you see an increase in teleworking, that's going to have a fairly small impact on the total trips in our region, and especially compared to all the other things that are currently closed that are going to be reopened. In contrast, if you look at just commute trips, within commute trips, whereas 7% of the total trips in our region are taken via transit, 25% of the commute trips are taken via transit. So you're likely to see actually a much larger impact on transit from telework changes and commuting than you are on other modes.
Okay, thank you. And Jack, you may need to jump on and clarify your question, exactly what you are asking. He's got here a two-part question. Timing, should there be any traction on smart scale adjustments? And second, legislative session 2021 bill updates.
Yeah, so I think when we look at the smart scale issue, it's a long process. It's been around. We've had 4 rounds of this. Every round they make tweaks in between the rounds. So there were some changes that were made last round that were made, frankly, because the Alliance became very vocal on this issue. But unfortunately, we didn't get all of the changes that we wanted. And I think that that's continuing to play out here in what we're seeing from the scores from the projects in this round. I think we're going to continue to push, but I think, you know, it's going to be a heavy, you know, road ahead. And I think that it's going to take some push from the General Assembly to say something's not right here. And they're going to have to be the ones that say, if the VDOT doesn't clean this up and the Office of Intermodal Planning doesn't clean this up, then, you know, we're going to make some kind of legislative changes that are going to force you to do it. But short of that, I don't see more than, you know, some tweaks here and there. But my hope is recognizing that, you know, Fairfax County, you know, the Commonwealth's, you know, largest jurisdiction, getting $0 and the state's construction program, you know, just seems tough to bear, frankly, and kind of ridiculous. And the same goes for Loudoun County as well. So, you know, as I said, I think that there definitely needs to be some adjustments we're going to keep pushing for. We passed that time for this legislative session. In terms of bill updates, I went through all of the bills, and, you know, there really isn't a lot for us in terms of impacts in Northern Virginia. Last year was our huge, you know, focus on transportation funding, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. There was a lot happening. This year, things have been a lot quieter. There have been some Greenway bills that have been put forward and that seem to be moving forward. I think what's most likely is that the Greenway is going to shift from into the right now. It's this old law that was governed when the Greenway was created, and they have to go to the SEC for rate increases. I think they're probably going to shift that over closer to the Public-Private Partnership Act, which is what most of the new toll roads are under, and that's kind of under VDOT. And that will give them more flexibility in terms of doing things like distance-based tolling and other things that they might need to do. So, I said, we have that opportunity to make that change. I think that will move forward. But otherwise, in terms of Northern Virginia, there just really aren't a lot of transportation bills this year that impact us.
I just have to kind of make a comment wearing my former hat as chairman with respect to the SMART scale. I just find it interesting the jurisdiction who blocked improvements for commuters from Fairfax, Loudoun, and other parts of the jurisdictions were a major roadblock in getting those improvements done, but they're the ones that seem to be getting all the money these days. A question from Evan Koppel, hoping to see the Silver Line open this summer or fall. It is critical to Dulles when travel returns and to turn DC and Maryland perceptions of the proximity of IAD to the city. If it does open this year, what level of service schedule-wise for IAD do you see? Match it to the larger airline banks of flights?
Yeah, it is the plan for WMATA to open service by July. They have it in the budget. That is a part of the plan and what they're hoping to move forward with. It'll be open for about 6 months, and it'll be the same service as the rest of the Silver Line, which right now for peak and off-peak periods is about 12 to 15-minute headways. So that's, a train every 12 to 15 minutes. So, I think that will definitely happen. As I mentioned before, with, transit travel down pretty significantly in our region, if they don't get more money, WMATA is planning to, in January of next year, close 22 stations, and a large portion of them are along the Silver Line. So that's why it's so important for us to look at, again, that long-term sustainability issue, because I've heard it too from the federal side. Folks are saying, we got you $800 million in CARES Act funding. We got you $600 million in the new funding stream. Okay, well, now you say you need another $200 million just to make it through, the first half of next year. At what point do you guys sit back and say, how do we have to look and make tough choices or pay, put our money where our mouth is? This Commonwealth of Virginia is putting an additional $50 million over the next 2 years, hopefully, into WMATA. What about our localities? Are they going to step up and make sure that WMATA is made whole? Or are they going to say, this is too expensive for us, we need to make some kind of moderated service cuts? And frankly, they could look at both paying what they had agreed to pay for in FY21. If they paid up that level, and they took maybe some moderate service cuts now, they could probably be whole for the next year for all of FY22. But because they're running 80% service now with only about 20% of the ridership, they're going to run out of money fast and then have that budget hole that's going to cause them to make those dramatic cuts. So if we were thinking more long-term and less focused on just trying to get federal money to reduce our local subsidies, we could have a more sustainable long-term system.
I think we ought to note here that there is discussion going on right now that is kind of permeating with inside WMATA about possibly not even opening up the most of the phase 2 Silver Line stations, as well as closing some current stations within their system, and which is very concerning to us. But at the end of the day, there's, if you don't have the ridership, it's going to be awfully tough to get those things opened up. But there's a lot of discussion going on right now within the business community, from the Tyson's partnership to many of the developers along this corridor, because they've invested millions of dollars in folks who have signed contracts for buildings opening up along this corridor. A lot of this, even some of the federal projects, are all dependent upon the Silver Line opening up and getting their employees to and from. Sean Reagan is asking concerning the Greenway legislation, is any of it likely to reduce cut-through traffic by people trying to avoid individual tolls? He's asking as a Herndonite.
Sorry, Scott, could you repeat that one for a second?
Concerning the Greenway legislation, is any of it likely to reduce cut-through traffic by people trying to avoid individual tolls?
Well, I think there's two things, right? One is VDOT has done a really great job of improving Route 7, right? So that has, created a huge alternative to the Greenway, for people getting, going north-south in our region. The other thing to keep in mind is that part of the Greenway legislation would essentially help them move potentially to distance-based tolling. So, maybe if you're looking at it going, hey, I can pay $1 to go from here to here instead of, the same price that you pay to go from one stop to the other, or to drive the entire distance of the Greenway, right? Having folks being able to have it might help change some of their calculus. And then also we just have to see what happens once things reopen, in terms of what the impacts are on traffic and other things in our region. But it's definitely between Metro, between Route 7 and other options. The Greenway can only go so high before folks start to realize, and I think they already have in some ways, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't have enough riders, so you raise the toll price, and then you lose more riders, so then you raise the toll price, and you got to kind of avoid that type of spiral. So I'm hopeful. I'm actually really positive on the Greenway, because I think they did a great job in hiring Renee Hamilton to be their CEO. Renee has tremendous experience working at VDOT up here in Northern Virginia. She knows Northern Virginia and transportation in Northern Virginia. And so I think hiring her to lead that effort to change up the way that the Greenway works will actually be extremely beneficial to our region.
Speaking of bypassing the Greenway, it was nice the other day to travel up to Leesburg and have the Battlefield Parkway interchange well under construction, and we're down to, I think, one more light. And it was a nice ride up there from Sterling. Let's see, any other questions? Seeing none, I did want to take up a whole lot of time, but I do have one, and it is with respect to Matt Letourneau's district and initiative. One is the Route 50 interchange improvements. We know there's been a dramatic uptick in cost, and I don't know if you're following that situation and have any update on that, as well as his initiative to kind of look at Route 50 bypass running parallel on the north side that would go through airport property and connect to the interchange that serves the Udvar Hazy Air and Space Museum. Do you have any thoughts or comments?
That's a great question, Scott. That's not an area that I've looked at as closely recently, but I do think there's a couple of key points for Loudoun there. I know they've done a great job in improving Route 50 in Loudoun County, but what we also really need to see is Fairfax County step up to the plate and improve their part of Route 50. Otherwise, it's the same kind of issue we're having with Prince William County on North Star. If you can improve everything you want to in Loudoun, but if your neighboring jurisdiction isn't right there with you, you're going to basically just be creating another bottleneck. I'm absolutely always in favor of having additional alternative routes, whether that's Route 50 or others. I think the redundancy in our network is always a really important thing that gets overlooked, because you do need other options to get around our region. And you can't just funnel everything to one road or one highway and assume that that solves everything. So I think having a Route 50 alternative is great. I'm not sure I would put it in the same place. I think having a 50, alternative, looking at like things like Braddock Road, and being able to expand there and other connections to I-66. But I think that would be fantastic. But the question is, again, where do you put it? And again, having more alternatives, that's why we support things like the Route 28 bypass, is because it's an alternative to 28 that expands capacity. And so that's definitely something we should be thinking about more in our region.
Absolutely. Anita, if you want to jump on and end the meeting. Jason, I want to thank you for your time this morning and for everybody that's been on the call with us. We appreciate it. And great information, Jason, and we certainly appreciate all the questions. Again, we are recording this, and later today we should hopefully have it uploaded onto YouTube for people to view and to share with others. And we will also post Jason's slide deck when we receive it and are able to get it up. Anita, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Once again, thank you on behalf of the Committee for Dulles. We really appreciated this. It was a great insight as to what happened both last year at the General Assembly, impacts during this past year, and what's going forward, as well as all the regional aspects of this, and of course the whole issue with WMATA and the Silver Line. I think the impacts of what happens with the Silver Line is another whole program. That being said, I just wanted to mention to people who are on the call that we're planning to have another legislative and economic development meeting on March 4th. Scott will be sending out notices, and we're working on exactly who our presenters might be for that program. But it will have to do with land use issues and the impact around Dulles Airport. Again, thank you to everybody who was able to attend, and we hope to see you next month, March 4th. We'll go back to our normal meeting date, which will be, Scott, the
It is the Thursday following the first Tuesday of the month. There is reasoning behind that, but I won't go into it.
Thank you all very much, and I hope everybody has a wonderful, safe, and productive day.
Thank you, Anita. And thank you, Jason. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Anita.